This is Harsh Rules. I'm Ben Harsh, and today we're going to learn to play the Great Wars Tank Expansion. Tanks is the Great War's first expansion, and naturally it contains tanks, but it also contains a number of new terrain hexes, and it brings the scenario count up to 40. So minus the 4 training scenarios, you have 36 Great War scenarios that you can play with this game now. Now, let's see a historical briefing and learn how tanks emerged on the battlefield of the Great War. While tanks are considered a new weapon of the 20th century, conceptually they've been around for some time. One of his many military sketches, Leonardo da Vinci himself introduced the concept of a mobile fortress. While this vehicle did not have treads or an engine, it was basically the blueprint for the first tank. While there were certainly armored vehicles after the 15th century, we would not see armored vehicles combined with artillery and engines until the 20th century. In 1915, the British introduced the first modern tank, called Little Willie. Little Willie never saw combat, but this was an important stepping stone in the development of the Mark I. The next iteration of tank designed by the British was Mother in 1915. This is the original Mark I tank. You can see the classic long-bodied rhomboid design, which was designed to go over trenches. The Mark I's are most identifiable, though, by those wagon wheel-looking things on the back. Those are for steering. While the British were excited to bring this new tool into warfare, there was some concern about the vulnerability of the new tanks. They were slow, they couldn't maneuver very well. Men inside couldn't see out of them very well. What would happen if it gets swarmed by the enemy? This German propaganda card shows that fear realized. The British decided to design 2 types of tanks. There would be male tanks and female tanks. The females would be equipped with .303 Lewis machine guns. The male tanks, symbolically, would be armed with the Hotchkiss 6-pounder QF gun, along with the .303 Lewis gun, so they had both. The strategy with the female tanks was that a steady stream of machine gun fire would help the tank crew fend off attackers. The male tanks would carry artillery, but would be offered less defense in close quarters with their machine guns. Now, the Germans claimed that the British tanks did not impress them on the battlefield. However, this didn't exactly stop them from capturing British tanks and rebranding them as German tanks. Meanwhile, the Germans would design and release their own tank towards the end of the war, the A7V. The German A7V basically looks like an armored train caboose. The A7V is equipped with MG8 machine guns and a 57mm Maxim Nordenfeldt gun. The A7V wasn't exactly the last word on tanks either. It did have its drawbacks. When thinking about tanks and the Great War, it's important to remember that these were prototype weapons that were rushed to the battlefield. Early tanks often just didn't work very well. They broke down, they rolled over, they got stuck. Conditions inside the tank were not much better. Tank operators worked right beside the engine, and many suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning. However, these experiments would pay off in later conflicts as the tanks evolved. So now it's that time. Get your bits together, people. It's time to set up the game. For the training scenario, you will set up Scenario 19 in the Tanks booklet, which is essentially the same as Scenario 2 in the Great War's original book, except for this time they've added 2 tanks for the British side. You will start by adding the Mark IV female and the Mark IV male to the British. The British will also conduct the no man's land shelling. If your memory's foggy on how to set up the Great War, you can head back to the original Great War video that I've provided and follow the instructions there. You will just need to add the tanks to that. Scenario 20 is the flip side of this battle. It's the same scenario, except for this time the Germans get an A7V tank. Now let's go over some gameplay rules and see how the new tanks work. Now, tanks is an expansion in the truest sense of the word. The structure of the game has not changed from before. It's still command and colors. You're going to play a command card. You're going to order units, except for this time you can select to order your tank unit. You're going to conduct movement and battle, just like always. As I mentioned in the briefing, tanks are very temperamental prototype technology during the Great War. In other words, they broke down a lot. Which means after moving a number of hexes, you need to check to see if the tank broke down or bogged down and got stuck. Now every tank is different, but essentially there are going to be hex moves that's going to require you to roll the dice to see if you bog down. When it's time to make the check, you're going to roll a dice, and if you're in open terrain, you'll roll 1 dice, and if you're in a heavier terrain, you're going to roll 2 dice. If you roll a deadly, then the tank bogs down. At that point, you will add a bog down marker to your tank figure. Now on your next turn, if you order that unit again, you can attempt to recover the tank. When you make a recovery attempt, you roll 1 dice and attempt to score an HQ symbol. You can purchase up to 3 additional dice with HQ tokens to improve your chances of recovering the tank. Now, if you fail the recovery attempt, you can still battle with the tank in the condition that it's in. It just means you can't move. But you will battle with a -1 dice penalty. Ultimately, you're going to need to decide in this bogged down situation whether you're going to wait until the next turn, order the tank again and attempt a recovery, or just battle from this prone position. Or you can ditch the tank. So what's the rationale for ditching a bogged down tank? So basically, if you ditch your tank, you're going to reduce the amount of victory medals that the enemy can collect from 2 to 1. So the enemy will still have to destroy the tank, but they're going to get less victory medals for it. Okay, we've seen the big disadvantages with the tank. Now let's look at the advantages. The first tank ability is Tankschrecken. This translates from German as tank terror. Soldiers during this time period had never seen anything like a tank before. Imagine one of these monstrosities bearing down on a soldier in the battlefield. Therefore, in the game, any close combat with a tank, soldiers cannot ignore flags. Continuing this line of thought comes with the next ability, which is the ability to gain ground. So you gain ground after successfully defeating an enemy or forcing them to retreat from close combat. The tank can terrorize them, gain ground, and then they can launch a bonus attack. With a bonus attack, female tanks can conduct a close or ranged combat, but male tanks can only do close combat. If you destroy the enemy unit or force another retreat, then you will also need to gain ground there, but you cannot conduct another attack after that. Just remember, gaining ground is movement, and sometimes you need to check to see if your tank bogs down. Speaking of battle, let's look at how attacks work against tanks. They have their own separate rules for the battle dice. When attacking a tank, an HQ roll will earn you an HQ token as usual. A soldier is considered a miss. The next 3 symbols are complicated as they may or may not score a hit on the tank. Basically, you need one of these to create a confirm hit dice roll pool. If you roll a burst, a second flag, or a deadly if you're attacking with a bomber or artillery or cannon tanks, then you can move to step 2. For the second part, you're going to roll a new set of dice to confirm whether you got a hit or not. You add a dice for your first roll results, one for every burst, every second and up flag, and every deadly if it was applicable. You also get to add a dice if the tank is bogged down or is ditched, and you get to add a dice if you're attacking with a cannon tank or a mail tank, or your attacker is artillery. You add all these dice up and you roll them all at once. And then for every burst you get, you remove the tank silhouette, and if the tank silhouette's gone, then you remove the figure. Attacks against all other units in this game follow the traditional system, except you need to remember that now for deadlies, field artillery and mail tanks are also eligible. Now that we've covered the tank rules, let's look at the tank units themselves, starting with the Mark I tank. The Mark I tank is used during early scenarios in the Great War. There is not a specific Mark I figure. You'll use the Mark IV figure that comes with the expansion. It has one silhouette, so it can take 2 hits. The first hit removes the silhouette, and the second hit removes the figure. If you notice the movement in battle diagram below, you'll see that this tank can move 2 hexes, but for every hex it moves, because it's an early model tank, it must make a bog down check. The Mark I tank can conduct close combat with 4 battle dice. This Mark I tank is a mail tank, so you receive the 2 hex ranged combat bonus, where a deadly dice will also score a hit. Maximum range combat is 3 hexes. As for special abilities, the Mark I tank ignores the first flag rolled against it, as all tanks do. We talked about the 2 hex range deadly dice bonus. When ordered to recover after bogging down, it receives 1 dice with the ability for the player to purchase 3 additional dice with HQ tokens. And this tank may also use the butt and bayonet combat card. This Mark I tank is the female version, so the only difference here from the male counterpart is that they may be included on a machine gun barrage card, and they do not get the deadly dice bonus because this tank is not equipped with a cannon. Special note for female tanks on the machine gun barrage card: females may participate, but they may not crossfire. Next is the Mark IV male, which is identical to the Mark I male, except for they've worked out a lot of the bugs in the design, so this tank can travel 2 hexes before it has to start making bog down checks. The Mark IV female is exactly the same as its Mark I counterpart, except for that the bugs are worked out on this one as well, and it can now travel up to 2 hexes before having to make a bog down roll. The next tank is the Whippet. It is a female tank because it's armed with machine guns, so therefore it can take advantage of the machine gun barrage card. The Whippet can travel up to 3 hexes, but you need to make a bog down check on hex 2 and hex 3. If the Whippet bogs down, then you can make a recovery roll with 2 dice rather than the usual 1, and you can still purchase up to 3 additional dice with HQ tokens. Just a quick reminder that the Whippet figure was a quick starter promotion, and if you want a figure, you'll need to purchase it separately from PSC, or you're going to need to use some kind of substitute for it in the game. Finally, for the tanks, we have the German A7V, which has the bonus of having 2 tank silhouettes, so it's a lot tougher. It gets 2 hex range combat deadly dice bonus like a male tank, plus can also participate in a machine gun barrage card like a female. Other than this combination, the A7V's stats are very similar to the British tanks. This expansion also comes with a field artillery crew that are treated as a normal soldier crew. Every time they are hit, you remove one of the figures. The field artillery are immune to Tankstrecken. There is no line of sight restrictions for them, but if they do have line of sight to their target At a range of 2 to 3 hexes, they gain a deadly dice bonus. This is field artillery, so you need to make a choice as well whether you will move and not battle or remain stationary and battle. Field artillery can conduct ranged combat up to 6 hexes away. And those are the new units that you can get in the tank expansion. The tank expansion also comes with 4 new terrain types. There are waterways, bridges, damaged bridges, and fortified positions. The cool thing about fortified positions is that they stack with the terrain they're on, so you automatically get to ignore 1 flag and ignore 1 soldier roll against you, plus whatever cover you get from the terrain that the fortified position is upon. The second addition to the terrains are for waterways and bridges. Now, scenarios will tell you whether the waterways can be forded or crossed, or not crossed based on the depth. It's important to note that both the fortified positions and the bridges are destructible, so they can be destroyed by reserve artillery strikes if they roll a triple. So there they are, and they add a lot more variety to the scenario design. The following are some revisions to the rules from Richard Borg for the first game, so you can incorporate these into the expansion as well, and that has to deal with the bomber and any other future special units. The original rules stated that the bomber is always the last figure removed. In this revision, the special units are now treated more like markers than individual figures. Now, when the last infantry figure is removed, the special unit is eliminated as well. Also, whenever the unit suffers a casualty, you'll need to roll another dice to determine whether the special unit is removed and the unit loses that ability. So when the unit experiences a casualty, you will roll the second dice, and if you roll a deadly, then you remove the special unit and the unit loses its abilities. A quick reminder, you only get a victory medal for eliminating the entire unit. If the bomber unit or any other special unit is removed midway through the next revision deals with breakthrough objectives, and this is where you need to move your units across the map and exit at a certain point. The revision here is that exiting the battlefield costs 1 movement point. Tanks, as a reminder, score 2 victory medals for every successful exit, and if you play a Russian rotation card, you cannot exit the battlefield. Well, that wraps up today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and get a chance to play the new Tanks expansion with the Great War. I'm Ben Harsh for Harsh Rules, and I'll see you on the next episode.